We ready?
Yeah, we're
We're
live.
ready. We're on. We're live. Awesome. It's great to be here. Hi, everybody. My name is Glyne, like Shine, Roberts McCabe, and I'm with the Round Table. I should update my name maybe so everybody can see that permanently. And I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Jeff Solomon. Jeff, great to see you. But we can't be physically together.
Yeah, it's great to do it this way, and we welcome everyone. I know people typically take a couple moments to just get signed in, so we'll give another moment as people are still accessing the session.
Mhm. Yeah, and if you want to, as you're popping on, if you're on, if you want to jump into the chat and just maybe say hello, where you're from, so we can get a sense of who's coming in and joining us today for this topic. Because we certainly are living and leading in uncertain times. Uncertainty is the word of the month, I think. Oh, Pembroke, Ontario, Edmonton. Still have snow in Edmonton. And Ottawa, my hometown. Newfoundland. Oh, we're from all over the country. That's so great to see. Sault Ste. Marie, beautiful part of the country. Ottawa, Sarnia, Charlottetown. Oh, I love it. All these favorite places. Karen from Dundas. Let's see me pop on Karen. Gatineau. It's great. I love this. This is the part of technology that I absolutely love, is just, bringing all of us together. It's fantastic. In San Diego. Woo, I was just there this time last year. I was sitting in sunny San Diego looking at Seal Beach. That memory popped up in my Facebook today.
So it's a special event where we're collaborating with the Roundtable. So we welcome everyone from the Roundtable community and from the MindWell community, and thank you for taking the time today to share in this conversation, where our intention is always to be of value, and hopefully that you can take away some new insights and skills that are going to make a difference in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So should we get started, Jeff? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've given people a chance to
pop on and hop on.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of people already with us, and no doubt a few more will jump on. And we welcome people as we go through today's session that if you do have questions, we do try and make it interactive, that please put your questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them, either integrate them into the flow of the conversation if it makes sense. Otherwise, we'll save them towards the end, and we'll have a question and answer period at that point.
Yeah, and along the way, we might just ask you to kind of pop in. I think Jeff might have some polls for you, and I may ask you to pop in some specific answers in the chat. So please I know it's kind of a different kind of setup than probably a lot of us are used to and enjoy in terms of the face-to-face, but I'm going to make this as interactive as we can. So I'll do a quick intro for me, for those of you who don't know me and the work at the Roundtable, and then Jeff's going to tell you a little bit more about MindWell-U. So from our side, the Roundtable, we really focus on helping leaders navigate through change, disruption, and growth, which is really a lot of what we're going on with right now. And we really do that by helping leaders kind of figure out the mindsets and behaviors they're going to need to be successful. So as we've been working through the last month, we've really been seeing how leaders have needed to adapt to this new, I don't even want to say the new normal, because I think it's to this point in time that we're in right now. And we're very community-based at the Roundtable. So we have a lot of our members have been piping in and telling us kind of the views. And we worked with Jeff and his team with another group of ours, a HR group. And it just felt like a lot of what we were hearing from our community was around how do I personally navigate through this experience, and also how can I help my team and even members of my family, my extended community, as we're all sort of experiencing world in this way. So really thrilled to be here, really looking forward to the conversation. It is going to be a conversation. Jeff and I have kind of laid out some themes and areas to kind of dig into, but we're really interested in what you guys want to hear and talk about as well. So keep those thoughts and comments jumping into the chat. So Jeff, over to you.
Thank you, and delighted to be working with Roundtable again, and delighted to see all the people coast to coast to coast, and you know, that's something that MindWell-U takes pride in, working from people right across Canada, offering our services. We typically offer online and in person. Obviously these days it's online training in mindfulness. So we're all about making mindfulness more relevant and accessible for people. And in today's world, mindfulness seems to be one of the skill sets and one of the things that we can actually do in response to COVID-19 during difficult times. So it's an even more important skill today than it was before, even though I always thought it was an important skill. And today we're going to dive into that topic a little bit more, talk about some practical ways that we can utilize mindfulness in our daily life. So we're really grateful that you're joining us with today, both clients of MindWell and new people to MindWell. We welcome you.
Yeah, awesome. So I thought, you know, one of the things that we had a call this morning with some of the members of our community, and one of the things that really came up was this idea of feelings. And I feel like one of the things that COVID is really doing for all of us is pushing feelings to the forefront in workplaces. And so I wanted to do a check-in with all of you right now, really quick in the chat. If you could give me one word on how you're feeling today, right now, in this moment. We'd love to kind of get a pulse check from this community. Bored, anxious, isolated. Wow, some heavy words. One word only. Challenged, bewildered, overwhelmed, uncertain. A few people are feeling grateful. Nice to see. Yeah, it's very, you know what, as I'm reading this, I feel like I'm going on a bit of a roller coaster of emotion with all of you through this. It's a very up and down feeling. That's what we're noticing with the groups that we're working with. It's almost like day to day, moment to moment, how we're navigating through this. So Jeff, how can we get I think it would be great, we talked a little bit about maybe doing a centering practice to kind of get us into the flow of today and the conversation today. Do you have something that might be useful for us here to get our emotions centered?
Working with our emotions. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the strengths of mindfulness, is helping us work with emotions, both regulating our emotions and working with difficult emotions. And one way that we can start is by learning that, you know, we often feel full, and we can learn these practices for grounding our attention. So let's all start today with just feeling our feet on the floor, because we can even come into this session busy. You know, we had a busy morning, lots of things going on. So let's just recenter ourselves. Mindfulness is all about coming into the present moment. How do we come into the present moment? Well, we can start with our body. You know, our bodies are typically with us, with wherever we are, but we're often aren't paying attention to it. So let's bring in our attention into our bodies. Let's bring our attention into our feet. If we're sitting, we can feel our seat. Maybe lift and lengthen up through the spine so that we can have our good posture. The breath could flow a bit easier with our good posture. Maybe we can bring our ears in line with our shoulders so that our heads aren't too forward, and we can bring our shoulders back. You know, we spend how many hours a day right now? I mean, most days in front of our computer with our hands like this. So let's roll back our shoulders, you know, bring our heads back to the top of the spine rather than lurching forward. Even our posture in relationship to our computers, right? That's can cause distress. So we're coming into our bodies. We can come into our breathing, feel our breath, maybe moving in and out through the belly, maybe on the chest. You may be want to put a hand on the belly or on the chest, just to, again, connect the flow of the experience of our breath moving in and out through the body. This isn't esoteric in any way. It's just about really grounding our attention in the present moment and trying to keep our attention in the present moment with the inhale and the exhale. And we try and take 5 breaths like this. Just try and pay attention to 5 complete breaths where an inhale and an exhale counts as one. The breath is gonna, or the mind's gonna wander away. It's normal. Let's see if we can just bring it back. So we just feel the inhale and the exhale. Inhale and the exhale. So it is an exercise. It's a form of mental exercise. And we're really regulating our attention at this moment, back into the present moment. And as we're dropping into the here and the now, part of what we're also feeling is, what's present for us in emotions. And going, just labeling the emotions, but where do you feel the emotion in the body? And can you, if it helps to close the eyes, you can close the eyes. Where do you feel the emotion in the body? And see if you can move the awareness into that place of the body. And if it's anxiousness, where do you feel the anxiousness? And see if you can breathe with that feeling in the body. Just for a few breaths. And it's okay. We don't need to change it or make it go away in any way. Just exploring what that's like, just to breathe with our emotion, and bringing to mind this attitude is really important. This attitude of non-judgment, that we don't need to judge ourselves. In this moment, we don't need to wanting to make it different in any way. We can actually accept how we feel as okay. Even if it's unpleasant. Well, maybe we don't want to feel anxious. That's totally understandable, but that's what's here right now. So how can we be okay with that's the way things are right now? Because in order to change it, we have to be okay with the way things are. We'll unpack that a little bit more as we move forward.
Thank you for that, Jeff. I feel much more centered, and my posture has improved greatly. Just from doing that. I think though I think this idea of connecting with our emotions, so many of us are used to not connecting with our emotion. We power through everything, right? We want to just kind of park emotion and just drive forward and get results and keep everything moving. Like I think about the conversations that are predominating right now. We've got to get the economy moving again. We're really uncomfortable with stillness. Generally is one of my own observations through this. And so I'd love to kind of just get us going into a bit of this conversation a little bit. So as we talked about at the start, it's a real roller coaster that I think a lot of us are on right now. And what I noticed is when we started to move into self-isolation and that whole part, it was very tactical almost. People were trying to figure out logistics, it seemed like. And then after that first, I would say almost like a 2-week period, we then started moving into almost like the mental health aspect of it. And then for parents, if you're a parent of school-age children, started getting hit with homeschooling and everything else. And my observation as I was talking to kind of our group by about week 4 was that there was this fullness that we were experiencing. We were just completely overwhelmed. You used sort of that kind of expression of fullness earlier. And I'd love to, what's kind of going on for us right now? What's going on in our brains when we're feeling this, and what can we do when we're in this feeling of overwhelm, really? What kind of things can we think about?
Mhm. Yeah, and it's totally normal to have a sense of overwhelm during this time. And I think one way of feeling this. It's funny because the word mindfulness can be interpreted as two ways, like the fullness of the mind, or mindfulness, which is really about emptying or having more spaciousness. And what we're going for is the more spaciousness approach with mindfulness, and it does have the capacity. A mindfulness practice, it does have this capacity for, emptying our vessel, so to speak, where we have more spaciousness. Things feel more spacious as opposed to the overwhelm. So I think that there is something around the focusing of the mind that helps us to feel more spacious, because right now, like you mentioned, there are all these things going on in our head, from um, all the work obligations, the home obligations. We're bouncing between the two rapidly and being triggered in either context of the other. And there's lots going on. We're bombarded by all the media and such and such. So there's lots of things to keep our head going. So there's a need to really unplug and to recharge. And so how do we do that? And that's where mindfulness can really help, because this focusing of the mind helps us to get out of all of that chatter, and helps us to get a bit more clarity. And I really like the metaphor of the snow globe, because I think it's something that we can all relate to. You take a snow globe, even though we're past winter, we can work with the snow. You take a snow globe, you shake it up, you can't see anything, and then you sit it down for a couple moments, and it starts to settle, and we can see with clarity through the globe. And that's we can look at that as our minds, that we're all shaken up, we're overwhelmed, we can't see anything, we're in a snowstorm. But when we learn to sit our minds down for a few minutes, when we learn to focus and pay attention in a particular way, it allows the mind to settle, and we can see more clearly. And that's what mindfulness practice is helping us to do. It's this learning about how we can settle our minds. So I think that's an important piece to it. I also wanted to bring up, a couple other basic things that no doubt people have been heard about in the past, over the past couple of weeks, and they're kind of the basics that you hear before COVID, of just about exercise. And we've got a couple poll questions that we're gonna bring up, and maybe you could answer them. Do you currently have a physical fitness routine in the new COVID era? We're all working. I know you might have had one before, but in your new routine, work from home. Just curious to see this, a set physical fitness routine, something that you can rely on, because we know that this is going to help in significant ways. Just being able to be physically fit. We're all sitting a lot of the time in front of our computers, even more now. So this is a good indication for you. If you answered no to this, then it's an indication, well, maybe there's an opportunity there. And we'll put up our next one too.
I love that Richard said he's taking lots of walks with his dog. I think my dog is starting to run from me whenever she sees me coming and saying the word leash. There's a lot of dogs that are going to be quite happy for us all to go somewhere else.
How about a mental fitness routine? Do you have a set mental fitness routine?
What's an example of a mental fitness routine, Jeff?
Well, I think it's nobody. Thanks for asking it. I mean, nobody thought twice about the physical fitness routine because it's very normal. But the new normal is going to be a mental fitness routine. What are you doing for your mind? How are you exercising your mind? We go to the gym and we know what a bicep curl looks like, right? And that's totally normal. It's even normal to wear spandex and funny headbands, and nobody makes fun of you for doing that. but it still looks a bit awkward if you were to sit in stillness and in a quiet room, doing what seems to be like nothing. um, that's still not totally normalized yet, but mental fitness, we're doing something, and we're bringing our attention back just like we were doing before with our breathing, right?
Mhm.
So we're actually doing something with our minds. We're bringing our attention back into the present moment over and over again. So that's what I mean by a mental fitness routine, at least from a mindfulness perspective. There's lots of different types of fitness for the mind that we can do. Um, and that question was a bit open-ended, but having some sort of mental fitness routine is important, both for regulating our attention, also regulating our emotion, like spending some time learning to regulate our emotions so that when we're in the midst of our day, those emotions aren't hijacking us and
Mhm.
coming into our conversations and triggering us when we're having a business conversation. Maybe that emotion isn't overtaking us because we've worked with it in some capacity earlier.
Mhm. We had somebody who was on one of our calls last week and was in a bit of a was kind of struggling, like she'd really kind of hit her personal wall, very achievement oriented, very used to having goals and tasks, and this week she was in a very different space, and one of the things she'd really tapped into is she hadn't been connecting to her creativity, and so she'd spent the weekend painting and just putting her mind in a completely different place, but using that creative energy that she is so used to using to set goals and objectives and things like that, but using energy in a completely different way, and was feeling much more refreshed and happier. I would say she was just in a much better place this week compared to last week as a result.
We had a speaker, Dr. Grumman from University of Guelph, talk about boosting,
Mm,
theory of boosting, and I think his theory of boosting is very similar to what you just mentioned about taking when you're away from the things you typically do and you do activities that are different. It helps us to get a boost in our life. So when we come
mhm,
back to our daily norms, we have a bit more vitality. So
nice.
good question here, just to see where you are with your mental fitness routine. Again, there's no judgment involved here. It's just a little check in for yourself that, do you have something? What can you do to bring into your life for the physical fitness if you don't have it, or for the mental fitness? So
Mhm.
um, thank you for that. And let's go on to the next poll. I've got a couple more for you. They're just check ins for yourself. Let's see if I can bring it up. Oh, it's about sleep. Do you get optimal sleep? I mean, most nights. And has it changed at all?
And
Um,
how do we define optimal? Is that a good solid 8 hours? Is that what we should be aiming for?
well, yeah, I mean, 7, 8 hours. That's 7, 8 hours of good sleep. And then what do you do? And I think the question besides this is, are we intentional around our sleep? Um, are we doing something to optimize that sleep? Things like, are we going to bed on time? Are we going to bed at a decent time in the night? Are we turning off our screens at the right time? Not watching programs right up to sleep time, or sleeping right beside our with our phones and checking emails first things in the morning. Um, are we doing relaxing practices maybe right before sleep? Do we have enough time to actually, are we going to bed early enough to sleep? So there's a lot of different sleep hygiene, which is important. Sleep drive is important. Like, are we getting tired during the day? Are we building up enough sleep drive during the day, which can include exercise, and also not maybe not falling asleep, not having naps later in the day, even for short ones, because that can hurt our sleep drive. I know for me, one of the hardest things is putting kids to sleep and not falling asleep with them. But that affects my sleep later in the night.
Mhm.
So again, just checking in with yourself about sleep. Don't want to spend too much time there, but what are some simple things we can do in our day to optimize our sleep? And the last one is around eating and drinking. In As things have changed in the last month, working from home, are you now eating and drinking healthy most days? And again, this is just subjective. It's just, is this an area of your life that maybe you need to pay a bit more attention to? So we're actually seeing, quite a high number of people saying yes, they're actually eating healthy foods most days. So that's great. Maybe that's not something that's a big factor for you that you need to change. But again, the big ones are the physical exercise, your sleep, healthy eating, and some type of mental fitness. So maybe looking at those different categories and seeing what areas do you feel weakest in, and what are one activity you can do in your day, just one simple things to exercise or put more focus into that area for yourself.
This is a healthy crowd. That's pretty good. I feel like I've been boosting the stock of Frito-Lay regularly this last little bit, which is and baking. Our team has been massive on the baking. We keep saying we're working on the COVID-19 pounds if we're not careful. So we've issued a fitness challenge this week. This week we're all doing squats. You had to pick the number of squats you wanted to do. So that's something you can do with your teams to kind of also keep yourself in check if you're somebody like me who can go down the comfort food pathway if I'm not careful, for sure. Those are great. Any other things that you're gonna add in on that? I think those are some really great tips for everybody.
Yeah, I think they're just kind of awareness things. I mean, it's not brand new insights to say you need to exercise, you need to eat well, drink more water or get enough sleep. It's just, are we doing it?
Mhm.
And we've changed our whole routines now that we're working from home. And so can we just take a bit of time to make a daily schedule that's going to encourage us to get those things that we need, because we've just been thrown off the mark. And so can we come back to it? I think that the other opportunity here, we talked about mental fitness. I think it's interesting to look at this whole experience. Like, we're all on meditation retreat, and maybe you've never, meditated in your life, or you've maybe never been on meditation retreat. But in some ways, our social distancing is a big retreat, and it's a big mindfulness practice,
Mhm.
because we do have in some ways a bit more time, because we're not spending a lot of time commuting, and we're not spending a lot of time being social. So we have a bit more time in our days. Um, and how we're doing things. Meditation retreat is all about how we're doing things.
Mhm.
Mindfulness retreat, it's about how we're doing things. And so, can we take a bit more time to be fully present with, when we're doing the dishes, or we're speaking with our kids, or loved ones at home, walking the dog. It's just how we're doing things. So do we have to do things, in the busy, just trying to get things done, or can we bring our full attention into whatever we're doing? So mindfulness doesn't need to take more time out of your day. It could actually be putting time into your day. So we're actually more present in what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, I think when we are working with leaders who are trying to, learn a new behavior, shift a behavior, um, sometimes they sort of feel like it's on top of their job. And I'll say it's not on top of your job. It's around picking those moments and those opportunities where you can be mindful and intentional about how you want to show up. And I think one of the things that is really, going to our theme of uncertainty and things being uncertain, I think one of the things that I'm seeing with people, and I'm interested, those of you who are on the line, if you're sort of seeing this within yourself or those around you, is that this uncertainty is breeding a lot of fear and worry with people, and we know that repetitive worry. And that, I remember I used to have on a board in my office when I was first starting my business. It said something like 90% of what you worry about will never actually happen. And then my husband came in and wrote, yeah, but the 10% will kill you. And I thought that does kind of sum it up really nicely, right? We have a lot of people right now that are facing uncertainty, and it's different kinds of uncertainty. Some people are facing uncertainty about their jobs. Some people are facing uncertainty about, are my kids going to be okay? Are my parents going to be okay? If I'm an essential worker, am I going to get COVID? What's going to happen, to me if that happens, right? And so there's a lot of uncertainty, which is, or a lot of fear. in this uncertainty. So I'm kind of curious as to how we could leverage, mindful practices and those opportunities to help us navigate through this fear and uncertainty. Because intellectually, you can know, okay, this is a repetitive worry I'm having, but practically, how do you break out of that pattern, and how can you sort of stay centered through a very uncertain time? It is an uncertain time. There's no denying that, right? So,
Mhm. Yeah, it's very true. One thing it brings to mind for me is this notion of fear and the notion of the stress response. So we have to recognize that we're in uncertain times. This triggers fear. This is triggering our stress response. So often that part of the brain is more active right now. And so when we're stressed, and our stress response is triggered a lot of the time anyways, but now more so, and we're triggering this stress response, and what that's highlighting is this negative bias. So when we see things, we actually more likely to see things in the negative. So that's just what happens in the brain. It's the limbic system, the amygdala is activated, and the amygdala has this negative bias information processing system. So if we're talking, if you're speaking and in front of a group, back when we spoke in front of groups, and you're stressed because this is not a comfortable place for you to be, and somebody walked out of the room, what you would look at that, you would see that person walking out, you interpret that as, I'm not doing a good job. That's how you saw it. You're speaking, you see somebody walk out, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing a good job. This person's leaving. When in actuality, that person had to go to the bathroom, right? And it had nothing to do with you at all, or they had a call that they had to take that prior. So it's all about how we perceive things and how our brains perceive things. So we're not always getting fed the best information, especially when we're stressed and when we're fearful. So mindfulness practice helps us to downregulate the stress response and bring us back into the prefrontal cortex, the frontal part of our brain. And that's what the core function of mindfulness is, to help downregulate the stress response. That's where the most science is, to show the effectiveness of helping us downregulate that and bring our bodies back into homeostasis. And in homeostasis, it's greater chance of balance and health. So that's where we want to spend some time with mindfulness practice, so that we can start to get fed clear picture of what's actually happening. So I can say a little bit more about when we start to bring ourselves back into clarity. And I think a nice definition of mindfulness is seeing clearly in order to respond effectively. Seeing clearly in order to respond effectively, because when we're stressed and we're full of fear, we're not seeing clearly. We're seeing that 90%, right? We're seeing the worst case scenario of what can happen. And it's true, that could happen. But it's possible, but it might not be probable. And so we need to have that type of perspective. And when we can bring ourselves back into the here and now, we're starting to see more possibilities, more opportunities, multiple perspectives. And yes, when things are uncertain, it can feel like, where's the ground? It can feel very unnerving, but there's also a lot of opportunity when there's uncertainty. Uncertainty means we don't know. We don't have to interpret uncertainty as negative. Granted, there's a lot of negative things happening, what can perceive to be negative right now. Absolutely, we can't dismiss that. But there's also a lot of opportunity if we can open our minds up to be able to see it.
Yeah, it reminds me of the William Bridges change curve, for any of us that took that in school. And, and the first part of that change curve is the denial, the bargaining, the no, this isn't really happening. And so if we all think about where we were when we first heard COVID was coming, I was a major denier at, at the front end of this. And then you kind of go into this, we're all sort of in this, whether you call it the transition zone or the neutral zone, and it's uncomfortable in there. And a lot of there's despondency that can happen, there's lack of motivation that can happen, but the flip side to it, it's also where there's the most creativity that can happen, the most innovation that can happen. And so I think knowing that we all sort of travel through this curve in different ways, there's always that opportunity to look at how do we innovate in this. space. That's what you make me think of as you sort of share that. It's interesting how these things are so parallel, right?
So would we come in, I think, and it comes back to this question or the comment earlier about emotion. You
Mm,
use this acceptance of emotion, and it brings to mind this um, an old kind of commentary around serenity, right? Like, have the serenity to um, accept the things that cannot change, to the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
mhm,
So the serenity to accept the things that you can't change. It's not to say that you're happy and all the things that that change is positive. It's just moving into the space of acceptance of what that is, and that's a very difficult place to be or to get to, but it is a place that is helpful, and ultimately it helps you get to where you want to be, which is changing, which is getting to a more positive place. So there's a lot of deeper work to accepting the things that you cannot change, and accepting where you are, and that is a bit of a practice, and a nice notion that I remember I got introduced to years ago on probably on a retreat, was this notion of yielding to the present, this notion of yielding. And just like if you're yielding in a car, you're yielding onto a highway. You take notice where you are, you look at things that are coming your way, and then you move forward cautiously, right? And the same is true for us right now. We need to take notice where we are. We need to look around us, and we're still merging, we're still moving, we haven't stopped, but we need to merge and move with awareness.
mhm,
So you can internalize that about what does it mean to yield to the present, and that helps us to come into this place of greater acceptance in the here and the now, where we can actually see more possibilities. And then the second step of courage to uh, the courage to change things that you can. So now
mhm,
you have this opportunity to see more opportunities, um, to change and make the opportunities work for you where you can. And then this notion of wisdom to know the difference. And wisdom, I feel like, is an important player here. And how do we?
mhm.
Wisdom also feels maybe far away from us right now,
Right. Yeah.
and and I guess the invitation I'll put out to people as leaders, if you're leading yourself, you're leading your families, you're leading your organizations, and you have this connection with your knowing, your deeper truth, but it's clouded perhaps on more days than you've experienced in the past because of all the fear, because of all the emotion, all the noise. But these practices to help get you calmer and clear can help you connect to that knowing. So you don't have to look outside for what's true, what direction to go. I think the encouragement is to tap back into that truth that you have, and that knowing that you've always had. And it just might be a little bit harder to hear right now, but it's still there. So take a bit more time to listen to your deeper truth, because that's going to ultimately be your guiding path forward.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. One of the things that was popping up quite a bit, I was noticing in the chat as we were starting this conversation, was some of the practices. I love that everybody's sharing practices. That's one of the hallmarks of the roundtable. Is that we leaders sharing each other's wisdom. Um, it was this practice of gratitude and being grateful. And I noticed a few people in the chat are using gratitude practices to manage their fear and uncertainty. Anything that you want to kind of share around the power of gratitude and why we should consider that? Because I think some people hear it and they go, well, what's it going to, me saying I'm grateful for three things, what's that really going to do? Is there any science behind that?
Yeah,
Why
there's
should we be
there
grateful?
is some science behind it. I mean, Rick Hansen talks about this, and we have a part of on the MindWell Challenge. We talk about hardwiring happiness, and if Amanda's super fast, she'll find some link to a page where she'll send people to around hardwiring happiness. And it's a practice. I think there's a bit of uncertainty around, is it okay to feel joy? Is it okay to feel happy these days? Given that what we're all going through, and I would say that this is important too, to shift into these moments, that we still have little moments of joy, little moments of happiness. Things are still going right for us. If we're here on this call, we're breathing, then then things are going more right than wrong in this moment.
Mhm.
And taking taking some time to expand that moment to maybe a minute of gratitude. That's all I'm talking about. It just, we could finish a project. We're still finishing projects on a daily basis, and they're wins. And maybe they're small wins, but can we make them that win last for 60 seconds as opposed to having a win it lasting for 5 seconds and then on to the next thing? Because when we expand that win to 60 seconds, we're strengthening those neural pathways in the brain, right? Where our capacity for feeling joy. So there is science to show that. And that's what we're trying to do with hardwiring happiness. We're trying to expand the wins, expand the joy, so that those pathways are more easily accessed in our lives.
Right. Love it.
So should we, are you reading some of our posts and
Yeah, looking in to see some of the chats. They're awesome. I love the sharing and support in this community. It's amazing. So one of the things that we're seeing a lot of with leaders is, how they need to show up, right? In this time, and I've been getting a lot of questions on our side around that particular topic. How do you, how do you need to help your teams through this? How do I help my organization? How do I help my family? I think, leadership is, you don't need to be in a formal leadership role to be a leader, right? So I'm kind of, I'd love to sort of share some of the things that we're seeing,
mhm.
that I think that's really coming to the forefront. I'd love to kind of get your take on it, from a mindful place. One of the things that I think we've been very uncomfortable with in organizations generally has been talking about emotion and talking about feelings, right? We tend to, kind of, it's like I'm at work and no feelings occur when I'm working, right? And yet what this is causing, because we're all having a collective experience, I think this is certainly the first time in my lifetime where I can't really think of anything on a global level that's been so unifying in terms of a collective experience for all of us. Hey, it's, I don't know. Is there any other example? I think in my lifetime, I haven't seen anything that's quite as this. I mean, my mother was born, pre-World War II. Her dad went off to the war when she was 9 months old. So, certainly there's, people that have lived through those kinds of life experiences. But for, I think, our generation, for most of us, this is our first kind of big experience. And I think a lot of leaders are struggling with flipping over the balance to move from productivity, right, to caring and empathy and compassion, and bringing that conversation into the workplace. And if we look at, we were talking before we got on the call a little bit about our leader here in Ontario, a gentleman by the name of Doug Ford, who is getting a lot of accolades. And I think in the States, I know some of you are dialing in from the States, Andy Cuomo in New York, the governor of New York, is getting a lot of accolades. And I was reading, what they were saying about these two leaders in particular. And, the big defining characteristics was their compassion and empathy and caring in this time. And so I think one of the things that we need to get comfortable with as leaders is bringing conversations of emotion into the workplace and having the connection of, our feelings and emotions. And I guess I'm kind of interested to get kind of your perspective around this, Jeff, from being mindful, because I think one of the things, we're having this conversation this morning actually, is people in many ways don't know how to open up those conversations. We're uncomfortable having emotional conversations at work and meeting people where they are. And I'm wondering if how mindfulness and being mindful can help us with that as we work through this, because my guess is that we're going to be dealing with the emotional fallout of this experience. And I know I saw somebody pop in with 9/11 being a collective experience that we all went through, and I would agree with that. I think what's interesting, the difference to me between 9/11 and this is just the global scale of COVID compared to 9/11. I'm curious about what we need to be thinking about as leaders to create space for emotion, and how can we bring mindfulness techniques into creating that space for people to work through emotion, because I think this is going to be with us for a while.
Yeah, I think that the practice, I mean, there's a big part, it's not just regulating our attention, the practice of mindfulness, it's also our attitude that we bring to it.
Mm,
So, an inherent part of mindfulness practice is this notion of non-judgment, of kindness,
mm,
um, of patience, both with ourselves and with others. So that is a mindfulness practice, is how we're treating ourselves and how we're treating others. And I think that that's how we bring and non-judgment. I mean, we can be super judgmental. I mean, when that's the biggest, it's the number one insight that you start to find when you start to practice mindfulness. And when I say that, I mean, it's like when you start to pay attention to the contents of your own mind, when you start to notice like the thoughts that are going through your mind, what are they? And we're just watching, right? Like we're just learning to watch and heighten our awareness of the thoughts. It's not so different than a biologist who goes out, or a bird watcher, and goes out and watches birds. If you want to learn about behavior about an animal or birds, you go and watch that animal, watch that bird for an hour or something. If you want to learn about yourself, you want to learn about your mind, then you just need to learn to watch it. Mindfulness practice is kind of tools for learning to do that.
mhm,
And when we start to watch it, we start to notice how judgmental the mind can be.
mhm.
Um, and we don't have to judge ourselves for having judgmental thoughts. That's a big
Right.
one. We don't judge the judgment.
So hard not to, though. You say that and I think, oh, I just want to, it's so true. We slip into judgment so easily. And I think in a work context, just for, I know we're talking about living and leading in uncertain times. And I think at work, there's been a lot of judgment attached to emotion, right? I think one of our members was saying earlier today, you don't cry in the boardroom. Um, and I noticed that when we get confronted with emotion, we often want to bypass it. So we'll ask people how they're doing, and people say, "Well, I'm fine," and we just take it at fine. We don't say, "Well, you don't sound fine," right? And it's almost like we're not really wanting to kind of unpack what's actually happening with people. And I think a lot of it has to do with, we're uncomfortable with it, we don't have time. But I also think for a lot, I will speak for myself, for me, connecting to what's actually going on underneath, connecting with those difficult emotions isn't easy. It's not easy to kind of have to look into some of those dark places. And so it's easier to kind of move forward. And I think having coached a few people who've gone through some pretty significant life experiences, whether it's death of a loved one or dealing with, a very tough health diagnosis. Um, you know, they get their 2 weeks bereavement, they come back in, and the expectation is, come on, let's go. You're back at work, you've got to be productive again. And I think this is going to really cause us to have to look very closely at that, and very closely at how we allow space for um, people to talk about emotion and talk about feeling in the workplace, but also how do we help people and support them as they're moving through this. And I think this mindfulness practice, you got to start working on yourself first. Our model at the roundtable is it starts with self-awareness, and then you can help and move out to others. But it's an interesting opportunity. And I think in the bridges change curve, to me, that's where the innovation can lie for some of our organizations, is how do we bring more humanity and mindfulness type practices into our workplaces. It seems like there's a real opportunity for us to do that at this time.
And they don't have to be huge swings, right? And
Mm,
there are some some comments just about how that's a really difficult thing to do in the workplace. Being vulnerable is really difficult. Being compassionate, in a work environment that doesn't welcome that, or uh, doesn't seem to welcome that. So it's all about being skillful in how you do this, and in small ways. It could be really small ways that we do that. And to me, compassion or empathy could just be about listening.
mm,
Like that is a huge mindfulness practice, and it builds connection with people. Just being present to listen. And when I talk about this whole experience being a mindfulness practice, again, I think listening could be the number one, and number two, and number three thing that we do to uh, to practice mindfulness with others and with ourselves. just being present, because it's so often that we're not really listening to others.
Mhm.
And we can, we're not in close proximity, so it's really hard to connect with other people, maybe through Zoom, but it can still happen. And it can start by, letting go from all the chatter in our heads and thinking about what we're going to respond, by saying, or trying to fill in gaps of silence, and keeping our attention close to the other person, keeping an intention of non-judgment, and really trying to hear what's the emotional message being communicated, not just the top level thing.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think too, to go back to, I often think things can be simple, small practices, and I think about one of the things that I've always done with my team. I've always had this practice of stand-up meetings or huddles, and we've always done ours on a weekly basis. And prior to COVID, I have the same agenda every time. So my agenda always starts with, tell me something good that's happened in your life in the last week, and then, tell me your three priorities for this week, and then tell me one thing that's getting in your way. And so selfishly, as a team leader, you get to hear what's important to people, because what they share that's good often really reflects their values. Three things that they're working on that week, I get to see, are you working on the things that I think you should be working on? And then the things that get in your way, I can then, as a leader, kind of help you move those barriers. Now, when COVID struck, we had our team meeting, and we kind of powered through that update. And I very quickly realized that these aren't necessarily what I need to be connecting with right now with people. And one of the very small switches I made we made two switches. We used to meet just every Monday to kind of start our week. What we started to do as a team was meet daily, and we just needed that touch point. And then the other thing that we started to do is start our meetings with, what are you grateful for today? And that, starting with that gratitude of what are you grateful for today, just that, giving people to kind of get our minds into that mindset. But also, we talked about, what are you struggling with? What's hard for you today? And so we can create the opportunity for people to share and come out with where they're having their high and low points, and create space for that. And so it doesn't have to be, I think often mindfulness, when we talk about mindfulness with our clients, I think there's this myth that people think they have to be sitting in the lotus position and chanting Om for an hour, to be a good mindfulness practitioner. And so much of, the reality of being mindful, bringing these practices into your workplaces, they're not big practices. They're actually small, little things, but I think they create ripples in the organization. When you start doing that, even if your organization is a mess, but with your team, you're able to bring some of these practices in, some of this listening, some of this being present for people at this time, meeting them where they are. It's an it's an incredibly powerful thing you're creating for those individuals, and the ripple effects that that's going to have for them when they go, when they're with their families, when they're with their children, when they're in their community. I think that's what we often underestimate, certainly in a leadership role, is just how far those ripples can be, and what we're role modeling with people.
Yeah, I think we try and emphasize that a similar perspective through Mindwell and approach to mindfulness, that it's accessible and relevant, for everyone, and it doesn't have to be an intensive meditation practice, but it also recognizes where we're at and what we need, because sometimes mindfulness could be how we're walking to the fridge to get some food.
Yeah.
Um, Versus, because that could be a mindfulness practice, and sometimes we need to sit down for 5 minutes and let our snow globe settle, because
Mhm.
it does have a significant impact on our brains, and helping to regulate our brains and access, it's still an incredible practice in terms of how it works, its effectiveness, and the science behind of how we learn how to work with our minds, our attention. And when we regulate our attention in certain ways, it just affects our emotional centers in significant ways. And we see things and we feel things that we didn't think were possible before. Like, it just really changes our perspective
Mhm.
uh, of our daily life, because it can help us feel more spacious. When we feel overwhelmed and you take out a plug and you empty a little bit, well, now you feel more spacious, and with spaciousness, there's more space for joy, and there's more space for, there's clarity, so you can see multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
So knowing just where you're at and what you need, knowing that mindfulness can be 5 seconds to 5 minutes to 50 minutes. It does move around, just like exercise. Physical exercise could be, having good posture when you're sitting at the computer. It could be doing a 5-minute workout, or it can be going for a 20-minute jog. It varies depending on what you need at what time.
Yeah, and I think the thing we work with primarily type A personalities in our organization that are very go go go, and I think one of the biggest things they're struggling with is the fact that everything is so up in the air right now, and this idea of it's almost like this loss of purpose for a lot of people. It's like there's almost a grieving around a loss of purpose, and I've been I was introduced to mindfulness practices about 7 years ago, and I say to everybody, it was a game changer for me. I was that stressed out over so much internal pressure that I would put on myself as this, overachieving, goal-oriented type leader that, really I remember my husband saying to me, my husband's a psychotherapist, and he would say to me, you really have to examine your relationship with control. And I think mindfulness actually was a way for me to start to separate those thoughts, and especially that inner critic. Those of you who struggle with which I think we all do, but how much you want to put it out there, but that inner critic that is very quick to tell you everything you've done wrong. Mindfulness was a really wonderful way for me to start to get some separation through that, and I do find has brought me a lot more peace and a lot more calm throughout my life. So I think I think there's so much that we can be bringing in that would just help on a stress level, psychological level, in bringing more of these simple practices in. And I do when I'm driving. I used to be a great road rage person. And then I realized what I was role modeling for my teenage daughter, who's now starting to drive, so breathing, using my mind. Okay, go ahead. You come in front of me. That's okay. I'm good with it. It's been a good practice to work on. I notice we're coming up on the top of the hour. It's
We
amazing
are.
how fast this time just went by.
Thank you for all your comments. It feels like we were secondary to all the comments and
I
conversation going
know.
on.
I wanted to be in there.
Um,
It was fantastic.
I'm not sure if we've had a chance to answer many of your questions. I know there is a question that I did see right at the end, just around introverts and
Oh, I
extroverts.
saw that one too. Yeah.
A little comment, because I had a comment on that the other day, and I don't think that mindfulness is just for introverts, or to say introverts are better at mindfulness. I think that the inverse could be true. You never know. Maybe introverts have a better disposition to go towards a practice, like into a quiet space to do a practice. But you never know what's happening under the surface. They might have a busier mind than the extrovert. And I think what we do know from the literature is that the science literature, is that the people who come to this practice, who are beginners, whether they're introverts or extroverts, they have the biggest benefit. And we've seen time and time again that A-type personalities coming to learn this practice, it's a game changer. They have the biggest benefit. So learning to do practices, this mental form of exercise. I mean, in I'd say probably 10 years now, we're going to look back and mental exercise is going to be just as normal as physical exercise.
100%. And I think too, just to layer onto this introvert extrovert, we work with a lot of organizations that do a lot of assessing of people, and those of you who are listening who've done your Myers-Briggs, and I could say, what's your Myers-Briggs type? What's your Colby type? Are you an ENTJ, an INTP, all of DISC, all of those kinds of things. What I would say about all of those things is be careful of the label. Your mind is incredibly powerful. You create your own boxes, and I think when we label ourselves, this is going to be harder for me because I'm X, or this is going to be easier for me because I'm Y. Well, that's probably the way it's going to be, right? I think Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. I think extroversion energy. I feel like I'm an ambivert. Sometimes I'm highly introverted. Sometimes I'm highly extroverted because my work requires me to be extroverted. And I think that's where we can really, when we're aware and we have self-insight, we can also think about how do we want to show up for this? And in fact, how do I need to show up for this? So going back to kind of the work that we're doing around behavior in leaders, COVID-19 is simply a situation that you have to lead your teams through. And what does your team require from you? And then therefore, how do you need to show up? And that may not be the way you like to show up. You might need to flex your style a little bit and be mindful and intentional about the behaviors you need to be demonstrating through this time. If you're somebody who's all about results and you don't like talking about feelings, guess what? You might need to talk about some feelings right now. And that's what's required of you to be successful and effective, right, at work. So I would also just be, I'm a little bit anti-labeling because I think that our brains take that and they take it as a command, and we can potentially limit ourselves if we're not careful. So
Thanks for that
all right.
perspective. Yeah, I think we're about out of time. Any last comments, Klein, that you'd like to make?
No, I mean, I think we'll do obviously some follow-up. We've got a 4-part series on leading through uncertainty that helps sort of navigate more of the psychological safety side of this and other things. So if anybody's interested in that, they can drop me an email. I'll put my email in the chat right now for you, but I would say that. And also I've got some tips on, the behaviors that are necessary right now for leading through uncertainty. So if you'd like that, feel free to reach out to me, and welcome to pass that along.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll follow up with this. And one point from our perspective is we're actually collaborating with some researchers from the University of Saskatchewan and Ryerson University on a study around leadership and women in leadership and and mindfulness, and that's going to be starting at the end of the month. We'll send an invite. If you'd like to participate in that study, you'll get a chance to go through the MindWell challenge and fill out some surveys, so you'll be invited to participate in that if you'd like. Mostly though, thank you so much.
Thanks everybody. Jeff, great to see you, but thank you everybody for just engaging with us. It was amazing.
And thanks to your team at the Roundtable for promoting it, and to our team at MindWell for promoting it. We're so happy that the message got out there and you all joined us today.
Yeah, great. Stay safe, stay sane.
Bye-bye.
Bye.